What if I told you that one of the most celebrated geniuses of our time built her empire on a lie? That behind the black turtleneck, the piercing eyes, and the billion-dollar smile was a terrifying illusion. Elizabeth Holmes promised to change the world with a single drop of blood, but what she delivered was a carefully crafted fantasy that fooled the richest investors, the brightest minds, and even the most powerful politicians. This is not just a story about fraud. This is a story about the dark side of belief, the psychology of deception, and how ambition, left unchecked, can become a monster of its own. You're about to enter the mind of a woman who convinced the world she was a visionary, when in truth, she was trapped in a lie she couldn't escape. You can be anything you want. This phrase, repeated like a mantra in Silicon Valley classrooms, self-help books, and motivational conferences, was taken to the extreme by a young woman with hypnotic eyes and a deliberately deep voice. Elizabeth Holmes didn't just want to be successful, she wanted to be iconic. She wanted to be the next Steve Jobs, and more than that, she wanted to convince the world that she already was. But what happens when the desire to be extraordinary becomes larger than reality itself? When belief in your own vision becomes a prison of self-delusion? Born into a prestigious family, Holmes was encouraged from an early age to pursue excellence. She studied at Stanford, a breeding ground for revolutionary minds, but at the age of 19, she dropped out of chemical engineering. In its place, a bold idea took root. What if a single drop of blood could diagnose dozens of diseases, quickly, safely, and needle-free? The company Theranos was born as a promise of medical revolution. Holmes became the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. But behind the immaculate appearance, the black turtleneck, and the visionary rhetoric, something dark was brewing. The truth was being suffocated by the uncontrollable desire to be extraordinary. The fascination with Elizabeth Holmes is, in part, fascination with self-deception. How did she manage to fool so many investors, journalists, doctors, and even former US presidents? Perhaps the most disturbing question is, did she truly know she was lying? Or did she blindly believe in her own narrative? The line between fraud and faith may be much thinner than we think. For years, Holmes was seen as a prodigy. The media elevated her to the status of a tech goddess. She spoke with an almost hypnotic calmness, as if she carried a sacred secret. And perhaps she did, the secret that nothing worked as promised. Theranos' blood tests were faulty, inaccurate, and dangerously misleading, but the facade had to remain. And for that, Elizabeth dove into an increasingly sophisticated cycle of lies. The psychology of self-deception shows us that humans are masters at justifying their actions. When faced with failure, we seek rationalizations to sustain our identity. Elizabeth Holmes, wrapped in her armor of genius, likely didn't see herself as a fraud. In her mind, the failures were just temporary obstacles, necessary to reach a greater truth. The problem is that denying reality for too long becomes a prison. Theranos was built as a cult of innovation. Its offices were shielded, almost secretive. Employees were forbidden from discussing projects among themselves and, in some cases, even from entering certain areas. A climate of paranoia reigned. Yet from the outside, everything seemed perfectly fine. Holmes knew how to play the image game. Carefully staged public appearances, emotional speeches about saving lives, interviews praising her mission, everything contributed to the construction of a modern health heroine. But inside Theranos, the reality was very different. Engineers and scientists battled daily with machines that simply didn't work. Blood samples yielded incorrect results. Tests failed. Patients received inaccurate diagnoses. And anyone who dared to question or raise doubts was silenced, fired, or sued. Holmes established a culture of fear, where transparency was a mortal enemy of the company. The psychology of cults helps explain this phenomenon. Elizabeth wasn't just a CEO, she was a messianic figure. She spoke of changing the world, ending human suffering, revolutionizing medicine. And like all cults, Theranos relied on blind faith in the leader. Those who remained in the company, even in the face of clear signs of failure, weren't just employees, they were believers. Many sincerely believed that, despite setbacks, the technology would eventually work. And it's precisely this kind of irrational faith that leads entire institutions to ruin. But faith itself isn't the problem. The problem is when it refuses to face the truth. Elizabeth Holmes refused to admit that something was wrong. She didn't accept no as an answer. And the more reality distanced itself from the promise, the more she doubled down. Lies became institutionalized. Tests were secretly performed using equipment from other companies, disguised as Theranos products. And all the while, the media kept applauding, investors kept pouring in millions, and the myth kept growing. This cognitive dissonance, this state of holding two contradictory ideas at once, is one of the most dangerous mechanisms of self-deception. Elizabeth told herself she was saving the world, even as she was destroying trust in medical systems. She said she was innovating while hiding fatal flaws. This type of rationalization can turn good intentions into disasters of epic proportions. The collapse of Theranos began quietly, like an earthquake that first causes invisible cracks. A Wall Street Journal article by investigative journalist John Carreyrou was the spark. Based on whistleblower reports from courageous former employees, he revealed what no one wanted to believe. Theranos' technology was a sham. The promise of a revolutionary blood test was just that, a promise. The world watched, stunned, as the myth unraveled. Elizabeth Holmes tried to control the narrative, denying reports and accusing journalists of conspiring against her mission. But the facts began to speak louder. Federal investigations were launched. Partnerships with major pharmacies like Walgreens were terminated, and investors began to flee. Holmes could no longer hide the inevitable. Most disturbing is that even to the end, Elizabeth maintained the posture of someone unjustly accused. In interviews, she continued to speak confidently, claiming that everything would resolve. This is the culmination of self-deception, when the truth is so painful that the mind prefers to construct a parallel reality. For Holmes, perhaps admitting failure was equivalent to accepting that she wasn't a genius, but a fraud, and that was a burden her ego simply couldn't bear. The subsequent trial revealed even darker details. Emails, recordings, and testimonies painted a portrait of a company built on fear, manipulation, and lies. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't a victim of the system. She was the architect of her own downfall. Yet even then, opinions about her remained divided. Some saw her as a ruthless villain, others as an ambitious young woman who got lost in her own vision. This duality reveals something profound about human nature. We want to believe in heroes. We want to believe in people who challenge the impossible. And when those figures fall, it's almost as if a part of us falls with them. The fall of Elizabeth Holmes was, in many ways, the fall of blind faith in innovation as salvation. To truly grasp the essence of Elizabeth Holmes's downfall, we need to go beyond the facts. We need to explore what psychology tells us about human behavior in extreme situations. A central concept here is the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where individuals with limited competence in a domain overestimate their abilities. But in Holmes's case, the incompetence wasn't technical, it was emotional. She believed so deeply in her ability to change the world that she ignored every sign that she was heading in the opposite direction. Holmes wasn't naive. She was intelligent, articulate, determined. But these traits, when fueled by delusions of grandeur, became a trap. Instead of seeking truth, she sought confirmation. Instead of listening to experts, she surrounded herself with flatterers. For Elizabeth, truth was malleable. She claimed Theranos was light years ahead of the competition, when in reality, it was on the brink of collapse. This behavior leads us to another concept, motivated reasoning. It's the phenomenon where we choose to believe whatever justifies our actions, even when it contradicts the facts. But there's also a deeper, darker side, the construction of a public identity so powerful that retreat becomes impossible. Elizabeth was no longer just a CEO. She was a brand, a living prophecy. And when her image began to crumble, there was no way back. She couldn't simply say, "I was wrong." That would destroy everything. The culture of infallibility is cruel. It does not allow regret, tolerate failure, or forgive deviation. And in this context, Holmes became a prisoner of herself. Her deep voice, carefully studied, was part of the construction of that infallible persona. Her aesthetics, always the same outfit mimicking Steve Jobs, was not just marketing. It was a psychological armor. By dressing the part of a genius, she tried to convince others and herself. And when she finally began to lose control, each new lie seemed more justifiable than facing the abyss of truth. This is the destructive power of self-delusion. When belief in oneself surpasses the boundaries of reality, the fall becomes inevitable. Elizabeth Holmes didn't fall because she was stupid, evil, or greedy. She fell because she got lost inside the very myth she created. Her identity was so intertwined with Theranos' success that, when the technology failed, she failed as a person too. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes's trial reached its peak. She was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, held responsible for deceiving investors and patients. It was one of the rare occasions where such a prominent figure from Silicon Valley was actually brought to justice. Many saw the verdict as a victory of truth over myth. But was it really? Holmes spent years sustaining a narrative based on belief even when no one else does. This philosophy, sold as inspiration, became her undoing. What should have been a story of perseverance became a lesson on the dangers of blind faith, not just in others but in oneself. Her conviction was symbolic, not just of a CEO but of an entire culture that glorifies ambition without limits. And yet, even after her downfall, Elizabeth Holmes continued to fascinate the world. Books, documentaries, and series were produced about her journey. Some demonize her, others romanticize her, and this reveals something unsettling. There's still a part of us that admires those who dare to dream big, even if that dream cost lives, money, and public trust. The story of Theranos is also a reflection of our obsession with redemptive narratives. We want to believe there's a greater reason behind every disaster, that there's a lesson, a moral, a transformation. But what if there isn't? What if all we saw was a brilliant young woman destroyed by her own vanity? A society that cheers for boldness until it fails, and then crucifies it with the same intensity. Elizabeth Holmes's legacy goes beyond the courts. It lives in the startups now facing more scrutiny, in the investors who think twice before betting on hollow promises, and in all of us, who've learned that not every inspiring speech comes from a place of truth. Sometimes the motivation comes from fear, insecurity, and a desperate hunger for validation. The line between vision and delusion is thin, and in Holmes's world, that line had been crossed long ago. Elizabeth Holmes reminds us that behind success stories, there are dark zones rarely exposed, that the spotlight often hides deep cracks in the soul of those on center stage. She was at once both the architect and the victim of her own myth, a woman who confused faith with fact, ambition with truth, and ended up swallowed by the persona she created. Holmes's fall is a mirror for all of us. It shows how far we are willing to go to protect our illusions. It reveals the price of ignoring dissenting voices, and it forces us to reflect on the kind of society that worships success at any cost. In a world where appearance matters more than substance, where rhetoric outweighs data, it's easy to lose ourselves. But there is also a deeper lesson. Perhaps Elizabeth Holmes's true failure wasn't her non-functioning technology, nor the billion-dollar fraud. It was her inability to be vulnerable, to say, "I was wrong, I need help, this isn't working." In a universe that idolizes the infallible, humility might be the most revolutionary act of all. If there is a moral to this story, it is this: the truth always finds a way to emerge. It may take time, it may be painful, it may destroy empires, but it comes. And when it does, it demands courage to face it head-on. Let Elizabeth Holmes's journey serve as a warning, and perhaps a redemption, for all those who confuse genius with perfection, and faith with denial. Thank you for watching this video. We kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our posts. See you in the next video.